that particular market might only be 100 million globally.
Great, I'm just going to throw people at this market.
You can't afford to raise a lot of money to enter that market because it's already in decline.
Me and my team, we're going to go off and find better solutions.
Well done, but it's not going to be forever.
You've got a bit of a reputation with people who you've worked with.
They don't understand operations, they don't understand marketing.
So what is your problem?
I actually can't do this anymore. I want to do something for myself.
I'm Shona Grundy, founder and host of These Three Things, a podcast aimed at building a thriving and more inclusive startup ecosystem through sharing real lessons from people doing the hard work. We focus on the three strategically critical aspects of the startup journey: raising capital, finding product market fit, and expanding offshore. If you find this useful, please subscribe and recommend the podcast to at least 3 other people. We appreciate you lending us your ears and joining us for this episode. Today's guest is Selwyn Pellett. In 2001, after a long history of working with multinationals, Selwyn Pellett decided he had had enough. With 4 others and $250,000, he co-founded technology company Endace and Prolifix, followed by Armada and Coritex, which collectively have exported over $500 million of premium margin exports in over 30 markets. Selwyn is a highly active and respected entrepreneur, investor, and director in the startup ecosystem. Selwyn, welcome to These Three Things.
Thank you.
So, to get us started, I just kind of want to talk about your career history in a general sense so that people can understand who you are and where you've come from. You've actually had a long and diverse career, from broadcasting to oil refineries, and certainly not always at the helm. At what point do you think you were qualified to become a tech entrepreneur, and what gave you that confidence?
Well, yeah, I wasted my 20s, and that was oil refineries and other things, but they gave me foundational technology knowledge, so they weren't completely wasted. But I went into my 30s as a sales manager, became a marketing manager, became the CEO of a tech distribution company. And in that journey, as the deals got bigger, I went from dealing with purchasing people to dealing with the CEOs of the companies. And we're talking, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare and Gallagher Group. And so the deals got bigger, the engagements more meaningful. And I learned a lot from those people, but still had no confidence to go out and do it myself. And then I ended up going to Asia and running same sort of business in Asia for Avnet. And now I'm doing it all across Asia, the same deals, supply side, sell side, and doing with all of the largest electronic companies. And I came back to New Zealand in 2001 and went, I actually can't do this anymore. I want to do something for myself. And a group of us, in fact it was one of the guys from Gallagher, Neil Richardson, rang me up and said, how about we do this? And I said, yep, sounds good. And then somebody else said, how about we do this? And I said, yep, that sounds good too. So I ended up being a CEO of 2 different companies at the same time. One was Prolifix, one was Endace.
So at the same time, how did you manage that? Because I'm not sure I was aware it was at the same time.
Yeah, no, it was at the same time. And they were intermingled with intermingled shareholders, but it ended up that Prolifix was a hardware company designing and building hardware. And Endace was really kind of a hardware company that needed manufacturing and design capability. They both had different trajectories, but the ability to manage them both at the same time was relatively easy for me to do. But it also financially was a windfall for Endace because we managed to, because of my background in supply chain, we had no money, but we were doing, the first deal I did for Endace was $1 million deal at 90% gross margin, but we had to fund even the 100-odd thousand of raw materials. Well, Endace didn't have it. And then we did another deal. And so the working capital came from our suppliers, not from our shareholders. And so Prolifix became the original founding capital via the supply chain for Endace.
Oh, that's very interesting because cash flow and capital is king, right, for the survival of your business and actually That kind of rolls very nicely into one of our first subjects, which is capital raising. You've said this high-tech world is a great world. It's a tradable economy where ideas of the highest currency can be created. And I really love that, because we know that these sorts of companies can raise incredible amounts of money on these ideas, but many failed to raise money at all. So can you tell me about we've got Prolifix, but how did you raise money and how did you fund for your first business?
The first two companies, Prolifix and Endace, didn't really require a lot of capital at the beginning. But as they grew, they did require capital. And so we started Endace in 2001, and it was just shareholder funded, or using Prolifix supply chain to fund it up until 2005. 2005, we decided the market was bigger than we thought and that we might need some more capital. And we looked around New Zealand and went no, looked at Australia, went no. And we were looking for smart money but couldn't find it. I went through all of America knocking on doors, and we eventually decided to list on AIM. And the reason why we listed on AIM is our revenues were still tiny. Like, I think we were going from $5 million US to about 11 million US. No one was taking us seriously at that sort of revenue, but we could still list on AIM. And so we went, actually, we've got sales in Europe, sales in America, sales across Asia. Kind of doesn't matter which of the capital markets we're in. And so we raised capital in the UK on the AIM market.
And so on the AIM market, but why not on the New Zealand, the NZX or the ASX?
We were considered at the time to be too small, and no one understood tech. If you go back in time, and look at 2005 and how many tech companies were around, there weren't a lot. So tech was high risk and not for everybody, and the revenues we were doing were just too small to be credible in New Zealand.
I was going to say, that's incredible to think that, what did you say, 11 million was considered to be too small? Most New Zealand companies would just give their right arm for that. So, if I was trading at 11 million ARR, I would think that I could actually sustain my business and continue to grow it. Why couldn't you continue to grow it on that sort of, what were the pain points? Where was it you were struggling?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, to be perfectly honest, when we got the money, we didn't really know what to do with it, because with 90% gross margins, and maybe by 2005 we were down to 80% gross margins, and this is on what is considered to be a hardware product. So you don't get those sort of margins in hardware. And so, yes, we were sustaining our growth, but the moment we got the capital, we obviously did what everyone else does and go and hire more salespeople and expand the buildings and do all those things. And yeah, we got to over $50 million that way. So it worked.
It's a really good segue into an area of product market fit. So it's a new term that's come out. It's sort of, I believe that it describes how you have your customers understand the value. Do they want to pay for it? I found this quote of yours which really resonates with me. New Zealanders are never short of ideas. However, based on my experience as an investor, many ideas are developed in a vacuum with insufficient knowledge of the problem. And I think that most people believe that the idea is king, and that's me saying that now. And if you build it, they will come. I've sat in many rooms where they're like, oh, John Henry Ford didn't ask them. He said if they had asked me what I wanted, they would have said a faster horse, And so there's this sort of a level of arrogancy that we may know better than our customers. But your experience here, you're saying that they're developing in a vacuum. Can you expand a bit upon your understanding of product market fit and what you try to do to achieve that?
So at one level, every product has a market fit. It's just the market gets really small, so it's not scalable and you can't win. But if you take Endace as an example, Endace went out and was developing test and measurement equipment for measuring what was going on around the internet. And all of a sudden there was something called 9/11. And 9/11, suddenly we were getting inquiries, can you do this? Can you do this? And I'm talking to our engineers and they go, well, we can't do it today, but we think we could. And I said, we've got 2 weeks to do it, 2 weeks. And they said, oh, we can't do it because we need these optical things and we need to do this and we need to do that. And I said, well, if I get those for you, can we do it? And they said, yes. That was the $1 million deal. And that was, we pivoted from doing test and measurement to doing surveillance in 2 weeks. And that was the product market fit. Test and measurement was nothing, but the fit for cyber security, surveillance, we made it in 2 weeks. And from that moment on, that's what we were.
So you had a clearly defined problem, a clearly defined market, and they were going to pay you for it. There's $1 million. Here it is. Take it.
So their problem was they couldn't capture all the data that was available on the internet. Single problem we solved.
So you've then gone out and raised extra money to scale, right? How do you know your business is ready to scale? I've seen many companies that they raise the money and they're just like, great, I'm just going to throw people at this market. You know, how do you actually know that?
It's interesting because I got 2 different experiences with Endace. I would go back in time and say, actually, we didn't need to raise capital. We could have kept growing it without capital. But if I look at Prolifix and entering into the telematics market, you need to spend ahead of the curve. You need to grow your market share and you need to do it quickly. And I think that's the difference about whether you do or don't raise capital, is looking at how long the bell curve is for this product. Is it going to be here for 10 years? Is it going to be here for 10 months? And if you're only going to be there for 10 months, how much money can you afford to only have a 10 months worth of sales? So you've got to look at it and do a risk-reward analysis and say, this market is growing exponentially. I can afford to spend $10 million getting ready to enter this market, and I'm going to grow like hell, versus here's a tiny little market, it's on its way down, and I'm trying to get in it, and I'm a Johnny-come-lately, there's some big players. You can't afford to raise a lot of money to enter that market because it's already in decline. So you've got to really weigh up what is the market you're going after, nail that accurately, and then decide which part of the life cycle it's in. And if it's in growth market, go raise the money and get ahead of the curve and, you know, do a Rod Drury and a Zero and take the market by storm.
And you rush right into it. That's actually really interesting, because I know you're probably coming at that answer from as an investor, right? You're now very clear on the types of metrics you're looking for and these sort of potentials of these companies. Have you just described to me the ideal metrics you're looking for? Is there anything else you're particularly looking for in a company?
Well, going back to the statement about people develop products in a vacuum, the biggest thing that's hit me as we've grown up in various products is you eventually get to America or wherever your main market is. And if I take Cortex, we are now competing, the company we sold to E-Road, we're now competing with the best in the world at everything we do. So every company we're in, it's not a competitor, it's the best in the world and us. And so that's what happened, and you can't do that in New Zealand. You dream up a little product and you say, and I see young entrepreneurs come to me and say, this is a great product. And I go, and who are you competing with? Oh yeah, there's some guys overseas, but you know, they'll buy us. And I go, well, I don't think that's the way it's going to happen, but it could. But looking overseas and making sure you really know how big the market is, have a look at your competitors that are visible, because there's going to be another 10 that aren't, and make sure that this market is worth going after. And then as an investor, are you a savvy CEO? Do you have a founding team? Is the market big enough? Are the margins big enough? Yeah, those are the kind of the key metrics for me.
When I've seen people try and compare themselves to other competitors, they'll say, oh, but they're not like us. And I think the point is you're trying to find those that are similar, or why can I shift someone to that, to me instead of them, and actually to acknowledge your competitors instead of trying to pretend that they don't exist.
Well, even to build a strategy around a potential competitor, because it might be in an adjacent market that they only have to shift 2% and they swallow your market. So if there's a big player that's in an adjacency, why wouldn't they go after that over time? So it's not just who's visible today, but who could be. And that also takes you to a longer term strategy, is who could you sell to long term? So if there is a big competitor as an adjacent, that's a potential buyer in the future.
I've had some founders ask me actually about that, just as a side of competitors, and when you're trying to find product market fit and going offshore. What are your actual thoughts on these competitors who could potentially buy you? Are you trying to ensure that, are you trying to do it stealthily so that they don't know that you exist, or do you actually want them to know you exist so that they can actually see you as a potential acquisition? What's your thoughts on that?
So my personal thoughts are, don't become too visible to a competitor until you're ready, because it's too easy for them to make sure you don't win any deals. So a New Zealand company competing in the US, you don't want to rattle all the cages of every competitor, because they can just turn around and say, they've won a couple of deals, they're not going to win any more. So, but when you've won a lot of deals and you've got some entrenched revenue, and you may be thinking about either a capital raise or a sale, that's the time to, hey, we've taken a whole lot of market share off you guys. Maybe you should be looking at us.
Right. So, okay. So not quite as obvious as some people might think it would.
When you're on the beaches, it's too easy to be pushed into the sea. So make sure you've landed properly.
That's a good one. I'd like to talk about niche, actually, when we talk about product market fit. When I first started off my career, I once was told that I was entering a market that was too niche. And you've just talked about make sure the market is big enough and is growing fast enough. But now we go and we hear around the technology scene, investors are like, oh, we love a niche. Why do we love a niche? What is it about a niche?
So there are two parts to it. I love niches because you can drill down very deep, and it's hard for other people to acquire the subject matter expertise to compete. And Cortex has done a lot of that, and they've just drilled down into a customer base and said, look, no one else is interested in this, but we are. And we talk the language of that customer, and we build products specific to that customer, that market, and build products specifically for that market. And although it's only, and I'll make up a figure, 500 million market size around the world, you can build a 10, 15, 20, $50 million business off that size market. And from a New Zealand base, that's quite attractive. And you're not getting the rest of the world trying to compete in it. So you actually can carve out a relatively safe place to play.
That's what it was like for Endace, was it?
It was, yeah. Endace, it had a couple of competitors, but very, at the time we were raising capital, they were asking us how big the market was, and we estimated that particular market might only be 100 million globally. Turns out it's a bigger market than that, but it was a very small niche market.
I just want to pause here for a minute to tell you about our sponsor, Callaghan Innovation, Aotearoa New Zealand's innovation agency. This agency empowers innovators, helping you transform your world-bettering ideas into commercially successful ventures. What you may or may not know is that Callaghan have a fantastic suite of products called Upskill. These products will help you identify the innovation, R&D and commercialization skills you need to amplify and elevate your ideas, and then train you to put them into practice. So go check it out by heading over to their website, callahaninnovation.govt.nz/upskill. You've got a bit of a reputation with people who you've worked with. Their ideas about you with your product market fit is cleaning up a bit of debris after the fact in order to make it scale is more his vibe. Do you want to comment on that?
I'd say whoever said that was absolutely true. So there's a gap between when you're selling and when you're delivering a technology product. So in the enterprise world that I've largely played in, there might be 6 months between the time you first pitch a product to a customer and when you've got to deliver it, and sometimes 9 months. So there can be a credibility gap between those two, where you go, could I deliver this in 6 months? And the answer is yes. Okay, I can pitch it then. So you'd understand the customer's pain point, you'd understand what you needed to do, and you could pitch that as a solution, knowing, and this is the tricky bit, knowing what your engineering capacity is and whether you can divert resources to be able to do that. And so the cleaning up the mess afterwards is we nailed a lot of enterprise customers with what we were going to have when they launched. So yeah, there's a lot of catch up.
So there's a little bit of vision in there, but I would also potentially say that what you were doing is that product market fit thing, right? So what is your problem? Repeating it back to them, and them saying, I'll pay you.
Customer-led innovation is what I call it. So, if you dream up a product in a vacuum, you might be 100% right, or you could be 100% wrong. If you are following a customer and a customer says, this is my problem, and if you can solve it, you can get my business, that's one customer. Now you've got to sit back from that customer and say, okay, is this customer representative of the market? Is he a leader? Is he a lagger in terms of where he fits in the market? And if you can hang on to a large enterprise customer who is leading in innovation within their field, you're going to end up building a great product suite that's going to be valuable to that entire market. And that's what we've tried to do. Haven't always got it right, but customer-led innovation makes sure you've got some level of market fit, product market fit. And if you get it really right, you've got a big product market fit.
I've had some people in some companies I've been working with a little bit concerned, though, that if they keep following, this is what the customer asks of me, I'm going to end up with not a product, but lots of different technologies that I've built. How do you avoid that?
So the way I've avoided it is to be there myself. So it's typically in the past with these enterprise customers, it'll be me and a CTO, and we'd be talking to the customer, and we'd be doing product innovation on the fly, taking everything that we know we can do and every problem they've got and suggesting back to them, so I know you said this is your problem, but wouldn't this be a better solution? And they go, oh yeah, we hadn't thought about that. I know you said this wouldn't work, but if we did this, wouldn't that be a better solution? And you take them on a journey and they go, oh yes. And we ended up with people like FedEx giving us a quote that said, these guys are thought leaders. And so you've got FedEx, you're sitting down with all of the engineering people in FedEx and they say, these people are thought leaders. And that's what we try and do for our enterprise customers.
So if I hear that correctly, you were more listening to the problem they were saying, not what they were asking you to build.
Correct.
You were saying, great, I'm just going to absorb that problem, and me and my team, we're going to go off and find better solutions because we understand technology. Is that how you approached it?
And making sure it had a broader market fit than just that customer. So otherwise, you just become an extension of the customer's engineering team.
And that's always a concern. So would you have done anything else to prevent that? Maybe ran off and got some more data points, or is there anything else you might have done to prevent? Well,
we were unusual in that the CTO and the CEO are in every large deal. Now you can't do that if you're selling SaaS, for example. But if you're doing enterprise deals, you're already talking to 20, 30, 40 customers in that field. You know the market. So without any conversations with product people, you can sit there and you're on the plane, you're flying back to New Zealand, you're saying, why can't we do this? This customer wanted that, and I think, well, what if we did this? And so you're productizing on the fly as you fly around the world, which we just spent all our time on aeroplanes during the early 2000s. And it's a lot of time to talk and devise new products.
And potentially just there's patterns that are merging.
You solve a problem for one particular type of customer and you go, actually, here's a whole completely different sector. I bet they have the same problem. And so then you hire a couple of salespeople and say, go target that market. And all of a sudden, yep, you've got sales there as well. So we went from security into banking. So surveillance of internet into making sure all of the financial services were tracking their data correctly and nothing was lost. So lost data was actually the problem we were solving. And you just go, well, who can't afford to lose data? Banks can't afford to lose data.
Right. And you've actually gone from probably quite a big problem, which when your first customer first started, they were probably being quite specific. And then you've drilled it down to losing data. We solved the problem of losing data.
Yep.
And who has that?
Yeah, we solved the problem of
not losing data. That's probably the more proactive thing there. Expansion offshore, because we've just talked about you going on planes a lot. And you have said for any company to succeed, there must be an end customer with a problem that can be solved at a price the customer is prepared to pay that is more than the cost of solving it. As basic as this is, many founders and entrepreneurs fail to do this analysis correctly. Everything works on a spreadsheet, but that seldom translates to the real world. So in 2002, when you were the CEO of Endace and Prolifix, and you managed to convince large North American companies to trust a startup from New Zealand with critical technology delivery. How did you actually do that? Like, what was the first trust point?
I think Kiwis are trustworthy people, full stop. And we just we'd just tell customers, no, we can't do that. Yes, we can do that. This is going to be a problem for us. We don't have any money. We were just straight up, and that created trust. We went, okay, we're in New Zealand. They kept going on. They would say, you're so far away, you're so far away. And so you'd be talking to them on the telephone and you say, I can be there tomorrow. And they say, what do you mean you can be here tomorrow? What time tomorrow would you like a meeting? Knowing we could fly out that night, get to America and be in San Diego by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And they'd say, really, you can be here tomorrow? And I said, yep, try me. Do you want me there tomorrow afternoon? And so we just made a habit of removing distance and time as a problem. So that problem went away. And we were just traveled a lot. We couldn't afford in those early days, and this comes back to choices of funding. So I might have done things differently today, but choices of funding, when you haven't got money, you have to do the travel because you can't afford to hire Americans in America and scale up American salaries. So we just chose, we said, we're Kiwis, we just fly around the world. In those days, it was $7,500 to fly around the world business class, and we just kept doing it. Fly right around the world. Visit 15, 20 customers on the way and come home again.
And that kind of sounds like something that you need to consider when you're building these large companies. You know, we have to go offshore. The markets aren't big enough here. But what impact does that have on you and your family? And do you want to be on the planes? And is your spouse happy for you to do so, and your children and so forth?
I talk to a lot of young entrepreneurs, and they've only worked in New Zealand, and I've got into the culture of, I'll say 9 to 5 and then family life, or 9 to 5 and then hobbies. The moment you're the CEO of a company that's trying to go global, you start really early, because the moment you wake up in the morning, America and Europe are either online or going offline. And, I used to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, turn on my phone, and I wouldn't turn it off again until 10 o'clock at night. That's what going global from New Zealand means. And, you cannot do that 9 to 5. And if you try to do it, you will fail. And I guess there is an alternative. If you have a lot of funding, you could put people in place in each part of the world. But you haven't proven, at this stage, you've got a product market fit. So it's going to be an expensive mistake if you make it. So the way we did it was to make sure we had customers all over the world, that we had that fit, that it was profitable, and we scaled up the local teams after we'd got at least foundational customers in the countries we cared about.
Because of those time zones, and you can't be awake 24 hours, when you first started expanding, did you consider, I'm going to just target here because that's a better time zone for me to work in? Or did you kind of just go, I'm going to do North America and up in Europe as well, and I'm just going to ride the world clock?
obviously you can't be awake 24 hours a day, but I was taking calls at 3 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the morning. You just did whatever you needed to do. And eventually, you'd hire one guy in Europe and one guy in America, and they'd take the calls for you, and then it was 2, then it was 4. And so you managed that. Asia wasn't such a big problem. You could manage that quite easily. For me, founding teams are way better than a good CEO. So you need an operations person, you need a finance person, you need a marketing person. Sometimes you get a combo in there, but you need to have a skill set. And in both companies that I had, there were 3 of us. You had 3 people that basically made every decision in the company, and they were the founding teams. And while many, many, many managers were added and changed out over time, that founding team lasted.
I thought it was interesting that you talked about the sales-led CEO. That's quite often what's happening in startups. How do they move past that barrier of being asked, well, you can make that sale as a CEO, but, I don't know if you can do it with a sales team. And their catch-22 is, well, I can't get a sales team until I get my investment. How would you say they would overcome that to prove that they can actually address that problem?
So every problem's a sales problem, but it's better to have a sales problem than no sales. So in my case, I've always gone out and said, we need the revenue, we've got to make the sales, and we've got to prove that it's doable. My personal style is to say, if I can do it, so can you. Let me teach you what I did in this deal, and so we would expand our sales that way. But if you're the CEO and you can't make a sale, there is a real problem, because you've got all the resources of the company, you can commit to almost anything, and if you can't close the sale, time to go home.
So would you say then you're looking for companies that are led by sales CEOs? They might be technical, but you can tell that they can sell.
Yeah, I think a CEO who can't sell is problematic, because you've got to sell either to investors or to customers. You've got to sell somewhere. And to your staff. You've got to get your staff out of bed in the morning and motivated to go and to get out of the trenches and fight the good fight. So they have to be able to sell at some level. But equally, I don't want a sales guy as a CEO. Just a sales guy, just a sales skill is a disaster. They don't understand operations, they don't understand marketing, they don't understand all the other things that have to be put in place, because really a sale is just a supply chain of things that have to happen. And if they don't understand all those things, you get into trouble really quickly.
You probably have a formula now for your sales that you think is a winning formula. Is there anything that you like? Is there top 3 things that you do to make sure it's in place? You've said, I research the company.
Yep.
Is there anything else that you're doing to get that not just opened, but closed?
Obviously, researching the company and knowing the people and their whereabouts, but getting deep into the problem and understanding financially what that's worth to them. And that's a skill in itself, because you've got to be financially literate to be able to say, I can work this out. Even they're not going to tell me these numbers, but let me work it out. If I could save this much per vehicle or this much per customer, what is that going to look like to their balance sheet? And is there any other way of doing it? And then you're competing, and I'll use terminology I had, which was we'd take a construction dollar and we'd say, for every yard of concrete that's poured, how much is profit? And then we go, so we only have to tilt that a little weeny bit because the profit was really small. We can make a big difference to the profitability of that company by just this one little thing. And then we'd just hone in on that and sell and sell and sell that capability. So, the revenue in some of these companies, the revenue may be big, but the profit per unit is very small. So you can have a big impact.
And so I was just thinking of that return on investment then. Often that can come partway through selling, because you're like, okay, now we got it in, now we can measure it. But you're suggesting that there are part of the problem is the costs of them that you can try and dig out from them at the outset. How much does this problem cost you, so that you've got that in the back pocket to understand how you might reverse engineer that?
Yeah, I would say that the people that I'd be dealing with are too cagey to give you that information, because they know what you're doing with it. They know it's going to be played back to them in some form. So you have to actually do a bit more groundwork. So you can look at other companies' financials. You can work out, using common sense, mathematics, you can work it out what's going on in that company and put together a formula. And I try, it's a try statement, I try and walk in with a statement. Even if I'm wrong, I walk in and say, I believe that these vehicles or this problem is costing you X. Now, by making that bold statement, you're asking for either credibility to given you, or you're going to be exited out the door, or you're close enough that they'll open up. And that's typically what would happen, that you were showing insight. You showed insight, you were close enough that they opened the door and said, okay, well, since you already know this, let's talk about it.
That's fascinating. That's a really good one. I haven't seen that done before. I'm always trying to figure out the metrics partway through. Yeah.
I think of it as a gift. If you're walking into a customer and you're asking for time, give them a gift, and the gift is an idea they hadn't thought about or an insight they haven't seen of themselves. And so if you give them a gift, when you walk in the door, they go, oh, actually, that's quite valuable. Okay, sit down, let's have a coffee.
You've said success is a very poor teacher. What do you mean by that?
When you're one pay round from shutting the door, you can't make a single mistake. So the closer you get to the cliff, you're more aware of every dollar that you're spending and every mistake that you make. So when you're successful and there's money flowing everywhere, you can have a dozen mistakes in the company and no one even knows. It's, rounding error here, rounding error there, no one knows where the problems are. But when you're coming up to that cliff face and you're running out of money and things are going wrong, you're aware of every single problem. It's like the water level going down and you see all the rocks. But when the money comes in, you can't see the rocks anymore. So you learn more in those stressful situations about you, about your staff, about the way the company operates. You learn everything in those moments.
For example, is there a time when that was happening to you? And
there's many examples.
Many times.
There's many examples. I was at an Institute of Directors meeting and they asked me to speak, and I talked about being a startup company, and I said, look, we would have a board meeting, we'd schedule the board meeting for when we're solvent. And I said, because we were insolvent so often that, we actually couldn't have a board meeting and declare solvency. So we'd wait until we thought we were solvent, get the financials and go, yep, we're solvent, have a board meeting, yes, we're solvent, we can pay our bills as they fall due. So there's been many times when we've been at the cliff face over the years. So,
yeah, that was your way of getting around.
We were solvent at the time.
Is there, I've gone through that, and it was deeply painful. And I look back and I just think, what could I have done differently? Or I just wasn't sure, and I'm still not sure to this day, to being able to stop the closure of my business. Is there any sort of, for anyone who's listening at the moment, they're like, I'm at the cliff edge. Is there any sort of advice you would give them as to what they should immediately do when they're at the cliff edge?
So the example I'll give is we had the bank pull our overdraft, and we were in the middle of a large multi-million-dollar deal, and the bank said, sorry, we can't help you anymore, we're stopping your overdraft. And I think it was 300,000 was the overdraft limit, and they stopped it at about 200,000, and we couldn't complete the deal. And I've just landed in Chicago, and I get a phone call from our CFO and say, the bank's pulled our overdraft, I don't know how we're going to pay the wages, don't know how we're going to do this. And I just went, So I rang up our customer and said, is there any way you could, just change the letter of credit, do this? He said, and by the way, should say we've had these guys down to New Zealand, built personal relationships. And he said, Selwyn, what's the problem? And I said, the bank's pulled our overdraft. He said, how much do you need? And I said, well, a couple of 100,000 to $500,000. He said, I'll send it tonight. And so we hadn't actually, one qualifying part to that, he said, how much have you built already? And I said, X. And he said, okay, I'll pay for that now, and sent it overnight. So, ask your customer is the first thing. If you've got a good product and your customer wants it, perhaps your customer will help you through it.
I know of a company at the moment that I'm helping with, and they're like, the customer wants it and I don't have the investment money to deliver the product, but they are screaming at me. And I'm like, well, if they want it so much, is there not a way that you can just sort of structure the deal so that it's in advance, so that they get it, you're getting cash flow in and you can get it delivered? Because surely, because she's saying we're saving them so much money. I was like, well, that should surely be the answer then.
Yeah. If there's real value, someone somewhere is going to pay for it. And, if the customer really does value what you're delivering it, they will bend over backwards to make it happen.
I found mentors to be invaluable in my life and in my career. So my silent mantra has always been, be a sponge, open your mind, be a sponge. When I come across people that I truly admire and I know they've got something to teach me. So I'm very sure that we can't, have built ourselves in any sort of bubble. So who are your mentors and why were they there? What, when you came across them, who are they and why did you choose to stick to them?
A bunch of different people, but Angus Tate was a mentor. He took me aside and gave me a few slaps and told me what I was doing wrong, and he showed me around his business, and from that I realized how important his relationship with his staff was, how much he cared about people and growing his business for them as much as for himself. So in terms of building businesses with value for your staff, it would probably be Angus Tate. In terms of strategy and marketing, strategy marketing would be Neil Richardson, who was the former CEO of Gallagher Group. Manufacturing, John Wally, who was ex-Gallagher. So a bunch of different people, but each one of them had real skills that were not common in New Zealand, particularly at that time.
And so how did you go about getting them as mentors?
I never told them.
That's right. I'm thinking.
Never ever told.
You just asked lots of questions?
Yeah, we just had informal relationships that knowledge passed, and to the point where, eventually Neil asked me into Endace and I asked John Wally into some of our investments. So, those relationships became a lot more formal. Obviously, Angus passed away, so there wasn't any relationship left there.
Knowing what you know about mentoring, is that something that you actively get involved with, or how are you attempting to pass on your knowledge and what you're doing?
I informally and reasonably formally mentor people, but I'm always shocked at people who come back and say, you gave me the best advice ever and you said blah, blah, blah. And I went, I don't remember that, but great. And then there's people who I've handpicked and inside our organisations, and I go, this person is special. They need extra because they're capable of, leaving the galaxy. They're so clever and they're so bright. And if I can just help them on their journey, and, invariably you help them and they don't stay, which is okay. You're helping them, but you're accelerating their careers beyond what you can feed them inside your organisation. But I'm real happy to do that.
It's almost like they're just, they're fledgling for leaving the nest, and it was what was supposed to happen.
Their destiny was always going to be greater than the positions that we could offer them. What we could do is accelerate them, and it was was an early active decision by me, is to talk to the smartest graduates out of university and say, look, I know you're not going to stay for a long time, but will you commit to 3 years? In those 3 years, I'll do X, Y, and Z. And if you want to leave, let me know, and we'll have a nice transition, and I'll give you a good reference and all those things. But knowing that these really smart people aren't going to stay forever. They're going to be with you for a time. And if you get longer than that, well done, but it's not going to be forever.
Because I would say the culture of those coming into the workforce, we call them Gen Z now, brilliant, vibrant young people who their ambition is to start their own company. We know the statistics are they don't want to work for other people. They want their own business. I mean, that's exciting, and we want that. We want thriving economies where we're building businesses. But what would you say to those sorts of entrepreneurs that they want their own thing, but they're just emerging?
So I talk to them about building out their skill base. So I've had lots of young, talented people who've said, I want to go off and do my own thing. I go, it's okay, but can you do this? And they go, no. Can you do this? And I go, no. Well, I go, okay, so you're going to turn up and you're going to ask people for money and you don't have those skills. Do you have some other people who can be part of a founding team? No. I said, well, wouldn't it be a good idea just to build out your skill set first? And I refer to it as a pyramid. Pyramids don't fall over. Spindly little spirals do. And so if you're a one-skill CEO or a one-skill entrepreneur, you're very easily knocked over. Whereas if you've got lots of interlocking skills that you've built over a lifetime, you're there forever. You're not easily pushed over.
It's been wonderful talking to you, and I've learnt a lot about how you like to do your sales. I've actually learnt some skills there myself now. I think I'm going to go on with some big, bold statements as I enter a room next time. But it's been wonderful having a chat with you, and thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
I'm Hussein Al-Bedri, producer of These Three Things. This part of the podcast is called The Three Learned Things. Shona and I wanted to briefly reflect on the 3 key insights we got from today's episode, which is brought to you in association with Callaghan Innovations Upskill Products. These products are designed to help startups uncover and acquire the skills they need to succeed.
So that was just a fantastic conversation that I had with Selwyn. I learned a lot from it, and there were so many takeaways. But what was your first one for you, Hussein?
Yeah, it was such a rich conversation, and you could tell the depth of experience and knowledge that he's got was very vast. The first thing that really stood out for me is his commentary around sales. And he said that every problem is a sales problem. I feel like a lot of the time people can treat sales either as something that a particular function of the organization has to do, or a bit of a dirty word, to be honest. People might view sales in that way, but it's not. Everybody has to be selling. You're all selling. If you are part of the top team, if you're the CEO, if you're the chief product officer, you all have a responsibility to sell. That is something that a business really depends on, especially in the early stages.
I mean, you're going to live or die by your sales. And if the top team are not considering, one, how they can sell or how they can support the salespeople, then you don't actually understand what's required of a startup or scale up, really. For me, I would say the second point was having an international mindset from day one. I mean, obviously, this is one of the key tenets of the show. We're in New Zealand. If you want to be a successful business, you really have to have an international mindset. And Selwyn really describing what that meant. It wasn't just a concept. He was outlining, the time zones you were working through, how often you were going to be on the plane. And I think it's really important for people to understand this, because often when people go to start a startup or go into a startup type of business, they want to do it because they want to have more autonomy over their lives. And then the realities of a startup are quite overwhelming. So having that understanding, being prepared to commit to it, is really going to set you up for success, I feel.
Just on that point of the international travel, it would be interesting to see how that relates in the post-COVID world that we're in, and with all the hybrid ways of working and remote working, where the expectations have shifted slightly and some of those barriers would have been lowered.
Actually, that's a great point. Very good point. And then what was the final point for you, Hussein?
Look, the third thing that I really got out of the conversation with Selwyn was the importance of the founding team. He said that the founding team is actually more important than just the CEO. And the other thing that he talked about is the requirement for complementary skills within the founding team, so that you're actually building a fully functioning team that doesn't always have a single point of failure.
Can you do me a favor? If you like this episode, can you hit the subscribe button? It really makes a huge difference to us, and it means that we can continue to evolve, grow, and bring more insights from a larger variety of guests. Thank you for listening to These Three Things. Our podcast is fueled by our passion and admiration for startups and the courageous people who create them. A huge thanks to our wonderful listeners and guests, my producer Hussein Al-Badri, our sound and visual crew, Elisa Grishkova and Carl Butler, and our sponsor, Callahan Innovation, who are just as committed and passionate about the ecosystem as we are. Tune in next week for another episode of These Three Things.